Picture July 5th, 1947. You are Larry Doby.
Oh man, what a day that was.
Right. It is 7 o'clock in the morning. The summer heat is already starting to creep into your hotel room, and you are running on maybe, I don't know, 90 minutes of sleep.
Barely anything.
Barely anything, because you just played this grueling, physically exhausting doubleheader the day before. Your body is wrecked. Your mind is probably still vibrating from the crowd noise, the travel schedule, all of it.
It was a relentless rhythm back then.
Completely relentless.
Yeah.
And then the phone rings. You pick it up, and the voice on the other end delivers a message that fundamentally alters the entire trajectory of your life.
The ultimate wake-up call.
Exactly. By Sunday, you were told, you will be wearing a major league uniform. You will be playing for the Cleveland Indians.
Which is just, it remains one of the most pivotal phone calls in the history of American industry, honestly, not even just sports.
Yeah, industry's the right word.
And the person making that call wasn't some Cleveland scout or a major league executive. It was Effa Manley.
Effa Manley.
The woman who ran the Newark Eagles.
So we really need to unpack this today. Because on the surface, this scenario reads like, the ultimate triumphant American narrative.
The great success story.
Right. The barrier falls, undeniable talent is finally recognized, and the player ascends to the highest possible stage.
Yeah.
We are culturally conditioned to view this as just a pure feel-good milestone.
Oh, absolutely. The sepia-toned nostalgia.
Yes, the mythology of integration. But the mission of our deep dive today is to strip all that romanticism away. Because when you do that, you are left with the cold, hard, and honestly deeply unforgiving economics that actually govern that moment.
What's fascinating here is that this specific transaction, this single phone call, exposes a foundational truth about market power.
It really does.
If we look past the baseball diamond, this is a story about the mechanics of leverage. It centers on a literal $100,000 coffer.
A literal $100,000.
Yep, and it demonstrates with brutal clarity exactly who the American economic system was engineered to protect and who it was engineered to exploit.
And that right there is precisely why you, listening to this, need to care about this deep dive, even if you couldn't care less about baseball.
Baseball is just the setting here.
Exactly. Because this conversation is fundamentally about your worth. It's about how invisible legal frameworks and entrenched economic systems decide what human capital is actually valued at in the marketplace.
We're looking at what happens when the rules of the free market simply refuse to apply to you, even when you do everything perfectly right.
Which is terrifying, honestly. So to understand the gravity of Effa Manley's phone call to Larry Doby, we have to look at the empire she built. She wasn't just managing a local athletic club.
Not at all.
She was a central architectural figure in a massive economic engine.
Right. The scale of the Negro National League, or the NNL, especially in that post-World War II era, it requires a complete recalibration of how we view mid-century Black enterprise.
It's way bigger than most people realize.
Way bigger. In the mid-1940s, this was a $2 million enterprise. And if you adjust that for inflation and look at the relative size of the entertainment economy at the time, that is a staggering figure. The NNL stood as one of the largest Black-dominated businesses in the entire United States.
A massive pillar of economic velocity within the community.
Exactly. And a crucial distinction we really must establish right now is that the NNL was not a minor leaguer.
Right. That's a huge misconception.
Huge. It was never designed to be a farm system that just groomed talent for Major League Baseball.
It was an independent, highly sophisticated parallel market.
Yes.
And the foundational reality of this parallel market is that it was constructed entirely because the dominant market had explicitly decided Black players did not exist.
They drew a rigid, impenetrable line.
Completely locked out an entire demographic of spectacular, world-class talent. So out of that absolute exclusion, the NNL is born.
And the infrastructure required to sustain that parallel market was immense. We are talking about organizations with highly complex ownership groups.
They weren't just playing pickup games.
No, they had sophisticated revenue-sharing models, independent scheduling systems. Just think about coordinating a nationwide travel and exhibition schedule without the logistical support of the dominant sports monopoly.
It's a massive undertaking.
Massive. They cultivated deeply loyal consumer bases that generated significant gate receipts. And crucially, they operated on legally enforceable player contracts.
Wait, I want to pause right there. because it is vital to understand the mechanics of these contracts. These were not, handshake deals in a back room.
No, these were formal documents.
They were not informal agreements. The players in the NNL were not free agents just wandering from town to town looking for the highest bidder every weekend.
Right. They were bound by strict legal contracts to their respective clubs.
So to visualize this outside the context of sports, imagine building a wildly successful indie tech ecosystem entirely from scratch.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right. Let's say you are a visionary software engineer, but Silicon Valley outright blacklists you. You just can't get hired.
Venture capital won't touch you.
Exactly. The major cloud providers refuse to host your servers. So what do? You build your own servers.
You code your own proprietary operating system.
Yes. You attract millions of active daily users to this platform you built from the ground up. You're generating massive, verifiable revenue.
Real cash flow.
Real cash. You have legally binding terms of service, ironclad employment contracts, a full corporate infrastructure. Basically, you have built a parallel tech universe that works perfectly.
And in that scenario, you've created a self-sustaining economy, right? With quantifiable assets and structural integrity.
Exactly. You have a product, capital, and domestic legal standing.
But, and here's the core contradiction we need to get into. If this parallel tech universe, or in our case, the NNL, has legally enforceable contracts, millions in revenue, and premium assets like Larry Doby.
Right, the ultimate premium asset.
Why is there a sudden total evaporation of leverage the exact moment the dominant market decides they want what you have?
That is the $1 million, or I guess $100,000 question. If Effa Manley holds a legally binding contract for Doby, why can't she just sit at the negotiating table, point to the ink on the page, and demand the standard market rate?
Because leverage in a market economy doesn't exist in a vacuum. It relies entirely on a shared legal framework that actually recognizes and enforces that leverage.
And they didn't have that.
They had everything required for a functioning business, except institutional leverage over the specific entity that was about to absorb their talent.
They were operating in the shadow of this profound legal anomaly. It basically rendered their contracts completely invisible to the one buyer that actually mattered.
Completely invisible.
We really have to dig into this legal anomaly because it defies all modern logic. Let's look at the bizarre legal shield protecting Major League Baseball, this invisible force field Effa Manley was crashing into.
It's wild. The bedrock of this power dynamic traces all the way back to 1922, to a Supreme Court decision in Federal Baseball Club versus National League.
1922.
Yep. In this ruling, the Supreme Court handed Major League Baseball a blanket antitrust exemption.
Which is just crazy.
They granted MLB a legal status that no other professional sports league and arguably no other interstate business in America possesses.
The mechanics of that ruling are baffling to me. You have a multi-billion-dollar industry, and even back then, it was massive, right?
Oh, huge.
Teams are crossing state lines on trains. They are broadcasting games across state lines on the radio. They're selling merchandise manufactured all over the place.
Interstate commerce by every definition.
By every logical definition. And yet, the Supreme Court categorizes this sprawling interstate commerce as a purely state affair. How does that even happen?
Well, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the unanimous opinion, and his argument hinged on a very narrow, almost pre-industrial interpretation of commerce.
Pre-industrial?
The court essentially decided that the actual exhibition of baseball, the physical game being played on the field, was a purely local event.
Just guys hitting a ball in a park?
Right. And the travel across state lines to get to the game was deemed, quote, merely incidental.
Merely incidental.
Therefore, baseball did not constitute interstate commerce within the meaning of the Sherman Antitrust Act.
That interpretation completely ignores the underlying business model of a professional league. I mean, the product isn't just the local game.
Not at all.
The product is the league standings, the national championship, the syndication of the results to newspapers. The idea that the travel and broadcasting are merely incidental is just, it's intellectually bankrupt.
It really is. And the crazy thing is, the Supreme Court implicitly understood the weakness of that logic as the century progressed. As baseball evolved into this massive television and merchandising monopoly.
They had to know it was absurd.
They did. Yet they reaffirmed that exact decision in 1953 in Toulson versus New York Yankees. And then again in 1972 in Flood versus Kuhn.
Wait, they reaffirmed it in the 70s?
Yes. But in those later cases, the court actually abandoned the pretense that baseball wasn't interstate commerce. They knew it was. Instead, they relied purely on the inertia of precedent.
Ah, so they just kicked the can down the road.
Exactly. They basically ruled that because the exemption had been in place for decades and because Congress hadn't legislated it away, the court just wouldn't overturn its own anomaly.
They acknowledged the error, but decided it was too deeply woven into the fabric of the business to fix.
That's exactly it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the practical application of this exemption is devastating. It wasn't just a piece of historical trivia. It was a loaded weapon.
A massively powerful weapon.
Major League Baseball had the government-sanctioned authority to operate as a ruthless cartel.
Yeah, that's not an exaggeration.
They could act in ways that would trigger massive federal lawsuits in literally any other industry. They could collude to suppress wages, blacklist players, and completely crush any competitor league that tried to enter the space.
And the historical ledger proves this. Before 1922, the Federal League actually tried to compete with the National and American leagues.
Right, a direct competitor.
And MLB used its concentrated market power to strangle the Federal League out of existence by 1915. The 1922 Supreme Court case was actually the dying gasp of the Federal League trying to sue for antitrust violations.
And once the court ruled in MLB's favor, that was it.
That was it. No challenger league ever survived again. MLB could simply outmuscle, boycott, or absorb any perceived threat with absolute legal impunity.
Which clarifies a really crucial reality about the Negro National League. The NNL was never attempting to be an antitrust challenger.
No, they didn't want to go to war with MLB.
They weren't trying to siphon the white fan base or poach white players from the American League. They operated in a separate lane purely because MLB erected a wall and forced them into it.
But here's the tragedy of that setup. Exclusion is not protection.
Wow. Yeah. Exclusion is not protection.
Being locked out of the dominant market doesn't mean you are safe from it when they decide they want something you have.
One might assume that operating a completely segregated, parallel economy would at least give you autonomy, like jurisdictional sovereignty over your own assets.
Right, you'd think so.
But when the policy of exclusion finally cracked, there was no structural bridge between these two economies. There was no overarching regulatory body.
No joint collective bargaining agreement.
No legal framework to mediate disputes across the color line at all.
It was just a raw collision of two markets. And we are constantly sold this idea of the free market as a neutral, invisible hand, right? That it objectively prices value based on supply and demand.
But the market governing baseball integration was not neutral, not even close.
It was structurally weaponized to favor the entity holding the antitrust exemption. When Major League Baseball finally recognized the immense value of the NNL talent pool, they didn't have to engage the NNL owners as business peers.
Because of that monopoly status.
Exactly. Because of the monopoly status and the absence of any cross-league legal recognition, MLB executives could treat the NNL as an entirely unsanctioned, legally non-existent entity.
Let's examine how this theoretical legal framework translated into actual human behavior. When flesh and blood executives started extracting this talent, we see two vastly different methodologies.
I really do.
Let's look at Branch Rickey first, because he is historically canonized as the architect of integration, right? The visionary who signed Jackie Robinson.
That's the mythos.
But if we analyze the Rickey method purely through the lens of contract law and asset acquisition, a very, very different picture emerges.
It certainly does. Rickey set his sights on guys like Roy Campanella and Don Newcomb.
And these were not untested prospects.
Oh, no. They were monumental, franchise-defining talents playing on Negro League rosters. And they were under legally binding contracts with their respective NNL teams.
And Branch Rickey simply took them.
Just took them.
He extracted the talent and refused to pay a single cent of compensation to the clubs that held the legal rights to those players.
He unilaterally absorbed the assets. When Effa Manley wrote directly to Branch Rickey, clearly demanding the standard compensation that her organization was owed.
For a player under contract.
Right. Rickey simply ignored the correspondence.
But she didn't stop there. She escalated the matter to the Commissioner of Baseball, Happy Chandler. Which makes sense. The logical assumption is that the chief executive of the sport would enforce a basic standard of commercial ethics.
If only to maintain the integrity of professional baseball contracts overall.
Right. But Chandler offered the exact same silence. How does that mechanism actually work? How does Rickey ignore a legal contract without facing an immediate injunction or a massive tortious interference lawsuit?
It all comes back to that cartel structure. Rickey was operating strictly within the bylaws of, quote, Organized baseball. That was the official legal term for the MLB monopoly and its affiliated minor leagues.
Organized baseball.
Right. And within that cartel, there were strict rules preventing teams from poaching each other's players. But the NNL was classified as outside of organized baseball.
So it just didn't count.
To MLB, NNL contracts carry no more legal weight than a roster sheet for a Sunday company softball picnic. If an entity is outside the cartel agreement, they are entirely outside the protections of the agreement.
What makes the Rickey Method so insidious is the public relations apparatus surrounding it.
It's masterful PR, really.
It is. Rickey didn't stand up and say, hey, I am a ruthless capitalist exploiting a jurisdictional loophole to acquire premium assets for free.
He wrapped this aggressive corporate expropriation in the unimpeachable flag of moral progress.
Exactly. He framed the extraction of black talent as a grand, righteous civil rights crusade.
It is a masterclass in cynical corporate communication, but Effa Manley possessed the clarity to see the underlying ledger.
She saw right through it.
She publicly stated that Rickey's primary motivation was a highly lucrative business opportunity, not a selfless moral awakening.
She was deeply critical of the press for that. And the public, who just eagerly awarded Rickey the halo of a humanitarian, completely ignoring the fact that his specific method of integration was systematically bankrupting black-owned enterprises.
This raises an important question that echoes so loudly today. How often does moral branding serve as a smokescreen for the expropriation of value?
Oh, all the time. When massive technology conglomerates today use language about, democratizing information or empowering independent creators.
You really have to ask, are they genuinely advancing a social good? Or are they just deploying moral rhetoric to justify absorbing massive amounts of user data and creative labor without paying fair market value?
Exactly. It's the same playbook.
Moral branding is the ultimate shield against structural economic scrutiny. If a corporation can successfully position its asset acquisition as a moral imperative, the public rarely examines the balance sheet.
They don't look to see who is actually absorbing the risk and who is capturing the profit. So that is the Rickey Method. Extract the asset, refuse payment, and take a bow for social progress. But then we have Bill Veeck, the owner of the Cleveland Indians.
The guy who wanted Larry Doby.
Right. And Veeck's approach provides a really stark contrast to Rickey's.
Bill Veeck represents the anomaly in this ecosystem. Unlike Rickey, Veeck actually initiated contact. He picked up the phone, he engaged Effa Manley as a business peer, and he offered actual financial compensation to acquire Doby's contract.
Which brings us to a quote from Mike Veeck, Bill's son. He is on record emphasizing a very specific word regarding this transaction. He stated that his father purchased the contract.
Purchased.
He stressed that word because he acutely understood that no legal body, no commissioner, and no antitrust law was actually compelling his father to do so.
Bill Veeck had full access to the Rickey Method. He could have simply claimed Doby, ignored Manley's letters, and the monopoly structure would have completely protected him.
And there is an argument that frequently surfaces in discussions about free markets regarding this. Some might look at Bill Veeck and argue that his actions prove the system works.
Oh, the good actor argument.
Yeah, right. They might suggest that if market participants simply act with basic ethical decency, the market will naturally self-correct, that it will arrive at fair compensation without the need for heavy-handed regulation or structural mandates.
But that argument fundamentally misunderstands the difference between an economic system and a charitable impulse.
Completely.
Veeck's decision to pay did not validate the system. It brutally exposed its underlying failure. When fair compensation is entirely voluntary, it is not a structural protection.
It's just a whim.
It is a whim. The NNL's entire economic viability was suddenly dependent on the existence of a sympathetic buyer.
And if your business model requires the person sitting across the negotiating table to just be in generous mood, you don't actually have a business model.
You are relying on benevolence, not leverage.
If property rights and contract validity are only recognized when the dominant power chooses to recognize them, those aren't rights. They are indulgences.
Effa Manley possessed no structural right to be compensated for Larry Doby. She simply had the fleeting good fortune of negotiating with Bill Veeck instead of Branch Rickey on that specific morning.
You cannot sustain an equitable economy, or really any economy at all, on the unpredictable variable of personal decency.
Voluntary fair dealing is not structural protection.
That concept is just devastating. So let's bring it back to that 7 a.m. phone call. We have Effa Manley on the line with Bill Veeck.
The stakes are so high.
She acutely understands the macroeconomic reality. She knows the NNL is highly vulnerable. She knows her legal standing is practically non-existent. And here is where it gets really interesting.
Let's get into the geometry of it.
Yes, the precise negotiating geometry of this transaction. If we isolate the raw structural dynamics of that moment, Effa Manley is sitting at a table where all the leverage on her side has been systematically dismantled.
She is navigating three compounding asymmetries simultaneously. Three massive hurdles.
The first asymmetry is the legal vacuum we've been discussing. She holds a contract that represents immense commercial value. But the buyer is operating inside a state-sanctioned monopoly with zero obligation to acknowledge that value.
So if the law won't enforce her contract, what leverage does she actually possess in that conversation?
Almost none, Brad.
Her leverage was entirely reputational, which is the weakest form of market leverage.
Because all she can do is threaten bad PR.
Exactly. She could threaten to go to the press. She could launch a campaign framing Bill Veeck as just another Branch Rickey, a predator reading black businesses.
And fortunately for Manley, Veeck was highly protective of his public image. He wanted to be perceived as an equitable partner, not a ruthless extractor. So that threat of bad PR forced him to at least open his wallet.
She manages to clear that first legal hurdle and secure an agreement to pay. But immediately, she slams into the second asymmetry.
Which is really where the core economic injustice of this story lives, the racial discount.
Once Veeck agrees to pay, the negotiation naturally shifts to price. And Manley delivers a line that perfectly encapsulates the entire structural failure of this market.
She says, if Dobie were white, you'd pay $100,000.
And what is essential to understand about that figure is that Manley wasn't just throwing out a hyperbolic anchor to guilt Veeck into a higher number.
She wasn't exaggerating.
She was stating an empirical market fact. Within the protected ecosystem of Major League Baseball, $100,000 was the established, verified market rate for a premium, franchise-altering asset.
And Larry Dobie was unequivocally a premium asset. The Newark Eagles had just won the 1946 Negro World Series, driven largely by his performance.
He was a superstar.
Manley herself, who is a shrewd evaluator of talent, had stated publicly that Dobie was the best prospect in baseball. Not the best black prospect, the best prospect in the entire sport.
Dobie was a proven commodity with a highly predictable future value. The objective worth of the asset was fully understood by both Manley and Veeck.
Yet the final purchase price wasn't anywhere near $100,000.
Not even close.
The final number was a fraction of that, and that massive gap in valuation had absolutely nothing to do with Larry Dobie's ability to hit a baseball.
Nothing at all.
That massive financial discount was the literal, quantifiable penalty for being black-owned in an economic system that refused to grant you formal recognition.
It is the precise financial quantification of systemic disenfranchisement. The asset generates $100,000 worth of value. But because the asset is controlled by an entity existing completely outside the protected legal framework,
The monopoly can just acquire it for pennies on the dollar.
the discount isn't a reflection of the player's skill. It is entirely a reflection of the seller's lack of institutional power.
Imagine the psychological weight of that moment for her. She is sitting on a phone, looking at an asset she developed, knowing exactly what it's worth in a fair market, and being forced to accept a catastrophic discount purely because of the racial architecture of the league.
It's infuriating.
And compounding all of this is the third asymmetry, the gender barrier.
Right, because Effa Manley was not only navigating a rigged legal framework and systemic racism, she was operating as a woman in an intensely hypermasculine, profoundly sexist industry.
Despite being the operational genius behind the Newark Eagles, she functioned without a formal executive title commensurate with her power.
She was doing everything.
Everything. She was the treasurer, the general manager, the driving force of the NNL. But the patriarchal rules of the era required her to route official league decisions through her husband, Abe Manley, who held the formal ownership title.
Her authority was incessantly mediated and undermined, and the historical record provides a chilling anecdote that illustrates the sheer contempt she faced from the established baseball hierarchy.
Oh, this story makes me so mad. Effa Manley, anticipating the devastating economic impact of unstructured integration, formulated a highly rational, structural solution.
A very smart business proposal.
She proposed that Major League Baseball formally incorporate the Negro Leagues as an affiliated minor league system. This would have preserved the infrastructure, maintained the jobs, and created a legally protected pipeline for talent.
A win-win, structurally.
So she takes this proposal to the president of the minor leagues. And how does he respond to this serious structural business proposal from a fellow executive?
He dispatched his wife to discuss the matter with her.
He sends his wife. It is an act of breathtaking corporate disrespect.
It is a deliberate tactic of delegitimization.
By sending his wife, he is communicating, I do not view you as a peer. I do not view your league as a legitimate enterprise, and I will not dignify your proposal with my professional attention. You are a woman playing at business, so I will have my wife entertain you.
It was the ultimate institutional rejection, and as our historical analysis notes, sending his wife was the answer. It meant there would be no structural integration.
No legal protection.
No formal recognition. So when Effa Manley is negotiating with Bill Veeck, she is trapped inside this incredibly hostile geometry. A legal vacuum, a racial discount, and relentless gendered delegitimization.
Her negotiating position is structurally rigged, and she is acutely aware that her leverage will only deteriorate further as this unstructured integration accelerates.
So what does this all mean? We've analyzed the microdynamics of this specific negotiation on a July morning in 1947. But what is the macroeconomic fallout?
Right. What exactly happens to a vibrant, multi-million-dollar parallel economy when a legally protected monopoly is allowed to selectively strip mine its premium assets?
The result is the rapid and total collapse of the parallel economy.
It just cratered.
The mechanics of integration, while socially celebrated, proved to be fundamentally Pyrrhic for the Negro leagues. The economic data is unambiguous here.
Let's look at the attendance figures for the Newark Eagles. In 1946, they win the championship, Dobie is the star, and they draw 120,000 paying fans.
A great year.
Amazing year. But by 1948, just 2 years later, attendance has plummeted to 57,000. The consumer base is cut in half in 24 months.
And it's vital to analyze the driver behind that collapse. The fans didn't suddenly lose interest in baseball, nor did they maliciously abandon the NNL.
They engaged in a perfectly rational consumer behavior.
Right. The fans who had spent 2 decades investing their time and capital into building the NML simply followed the premium product.
If your favorite player is Lori Dobie or Jackie Robinson or Roy Campanella, and they are now playing in Major League stadiums, you are going to buy a ticket to the Major League Stadium.
The consumer acts rationally to maximize their entertainment value, but that completely rational choice at the individual level becomes the precise mechanism of structural erasure at the macro level.
The capital that previously circulated within the black community supporting black-owned businesses, stadium staff, local vendors, was instantaneously redirected into the bank accounts of the white owners who control the MLB monopoly.
It represents a staggering wealth transfer. Just think about the sheer volume of elite human capital that exited the NNL during this brief window. We aren't talking about marginal players here.
No, we are talking about the foundational legends of the sport. Larry Dobie, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Monty Irvin, Satchel Paige, Ernie Banks.
These are generational assets. Their intrinsic value to a sports franchise, if you measure it in gate receipts, broadcast rights, and long-term brand equity, is nearly incalculable.
And they were acquired for a fraction of their worth.
Yeah.
NNL owners were often forced to accept buyout figures in the neighborhood of $5,000 per player.
$5,000.
$5,000 for the entire prime of Willie Mays' career. $5,000 for Hank Aaron.
It literally defies economic reason, and those minimal payments couldn't remotely compensate for the systemic value hemorrhaging from the NNL.
When you lose a Willie Mays, you don't just lose a center fielder.
You lose the future ticket sales, the local broadcast revenue, the community prestige. You lose the gravitational pull that attracts the next generation of players and fans to your franchise.
Which brings us to the core thesis of this entire deep dive. The narrative of integration is almost exclusively framed as a social triumph, a story of barriers breaking and individuals overcoming prejudice.
But structurally, integration was a massive, unidirectional transfer of wealth.
It was the expropriation of immense value from an unprotected black-owned market directly into a legally fortified government-sanctioned monopoly.
It was a corporate acquisition disguised as a civil rights victory. And the resulting devastation was absolute.
The Newark Eagles, a championship franchise in 1946, basically ceased to exist by 1948. The rest of the Negro National League followed, with the final remnants folding in the early 1960s.
A $2 million economic ecosystem was completely dismantled.
When the league dissolves and the stadiums go quiet and the players finish their Hall of Fame careers in MLB uniforms, what is left?
What remains is the unassailable logic of Effa Manley's argument. History has completely validated her appraisal of the situation.
If Larry Doby had been a white player exiting a recognized minor league system, the price would have been $100,000.
If the Supreme Court hadn't granted MLB an antitrust exemption, creating that legal cartel, the NNL might have possessed the leverage to negotiate a structural merger rather than suffering a slow asset stripping.
If the market had actually been free and neutral, rather than rigged to protect the incumbent monopoly, the wealth generated by black talent might have remained within the community that nurtured it.
But the architecture of the market was never designed for symmetry or fairness. It was engineered to insulate the monopoly and absorb external value at the lowest possible cost.
Which forces us to critically reevaluate the true meaning of that $100,000 figure. It is not merely a number tossed out in a negotiation.
No, the ultimate analytical takeaway here is a redefinition of contract power. The ability to command fair compensation in any market is rarely about the objective, intrinsic worth of the product or the labor.
The physics of Larry Doby's swing, the velocity of his throw, that intrinsic value was identical whether he played for Newark or Cleveland.
Contract power is entirely, 100% about who holds the institutional authority to set the price.
Effa Manley was not mistaken about the value of her asset. She possessed a perfect understanding of exactly what the market would eagerly pay for Larry Doby under equitable conditions.
Her tragedy was that she lacked the structural power to force the market to honor the value it clearly recognized.
Her only recourse was to articulate the mechanics of a rigged system to the man profiting from it, clearly and without sentimentality.
She looked directly at the asymmetry and named it. I know precisely the value of this asset, and I know you are heavily discounting it solely because the legal and social architecture of this market permits you to do so.
That $100,000 statement is a flawlessly accurate appraisal delivered within an economy specifically designed to ignore it.
And that reality echoes through the final haunting thought presented in the historical analysis we reviewed for this deep dive.
Yes, the $100,000 is still out there.
Still out there.
And that is exactly where I want to leave you, the listener, to mull this over. We have spent this deep dive thoroughly dissecting a specific transaction in 1947. But I want you to extract the core economic principle.
The idea of generating immense value in an unprotected space.
Right, generating value in a parallel space, only to have a fortified monopoly extract that value at a massive discount. I want you to apply that to the world you live in right now.
Because it's happening everywhere.
Look at the architecture of today's gig economy. You have millions of individuals providing the essential physical labor that powers massive algorithm-driven monopolies. Yet they are structurally classified in a way that strips them of traditional employment protections.
They have zero collective bargaining leverage.
Look at the digital landscape. Independent creators spend years building massive, highly engaged audiences on platforms they do not control.
And then their revenue streams are instantly obliterated by an opaque algorithmic shift.
Leaving them with absolutely no legal recourse. Look at open source developers whose innovative code is seamlessly absorbed into trillion-dollar corporate software suites without a single cent of compensation flowing back to the creator.
It's the exact same dynamic.
So I leave you with this. Who in our current economy is creating undeniable premium value in an unprotected space? And what happens when that value inevitably interfaces with a legally protected corporate monopoly?
Where is the $100,000 still out there right now?
Exactly. Where is it being systematically withheld from the people who generated it simply because the rules of the market were written to protect someone else?